Your browser used to just kind of be a harmless window on your computer. But I tend to think of it now in terms of an old classic vampire horror film where it becomes the threshold to your home, right? To your sacred space. So if you picture this, an employee goes home, opens their laptop on the sofa, and suddenly that fortress of an office device becomes a relaxed personal machine, and the browser, the thing sitting between Netflix, online shopping, your dinner delivery, becomes the doorway into the company. And here's the part most people often forget. In folklore, as I said, a vampire can't enter unless you invite it in. And in cybersecurity, the browser is that invitation. One click, one allow, one moment of lowered guard after a long day of work, and an attacker is inside the same tab where Salesforce lives, or your HR data, or your customer records. So when I explain that the browser is the new endpoint, it keeps things relatively simple. There's some interesting similarities in cyber attacks and sales and marketing. And you mentioned, this evolution of the ask, where they'll see what works, and then based on that, they'll take that and they'll build on it and move it forward with other people potentially in the company. That's essentially A/B testing in marketing.
Yes.
Or how you would craft a sales outreach email or call. See, try it until it works. And once you figure out what works, you take that and you build on it to make it more potent, more dangerous in the terms of cyber attacks, or more profitable in the terms of marketing and sales. The psychology that is there plays on humans and emotions and our weaknesses. It's a numbers game, so there's facts there, and you can kind of use those facts to build a better weapon. But it's also at its core, the weapon is based on feelings. So it's this marriage of facts and feelings that makes the most potent, deadly weapon for cybersecurity.
Today, we have someone who's engineered a new way to talk about cybersecurity. Jeremy Ladner is the founder and creator of the CISO Signal, a true crime podcast built for security leaders, which I had the privilege of being part of last month. You can check that out on his channel. This time, we're turning the tables, where I'll be asking Jeremy about his show, security communications, and more. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, John. It's great to be with you.
Great. Well, let's start with how you got started in this part of your career, because you've spent 15 years building narratives for some of the biggest names in entertainment and corporate America, from Disney to General Motors. Tell us about the story behind the CISO Signal. Why did you pivot to cyber, and why focus on past breaches?
Great question. Interesting story. Cybersecurity, I think, is maybe the only industry where real life already sounds like a true cybercrime thriller. So I decided basically to tell it like one. When I left my last role, I had this moment of clarity. I'd spent 15 years shaping stories, writing case studies, and crafting press releases. That's my skill set. And I wanted to apply it somewhere it actually mattered, somewhere where storytelling wasn't just marketing fluff, but answering a missing piece of the puzzle, essentially. And honestly, cybersecurity was the perfect match, because if you think about it, the industry already is a true crime universe. You've got nation state actors operating like a James Bond villain kind of scale. You've got chaos driven groups like Scattered Spider, the Joker of cyberspace, who don't even care about the money half the time. They just kind of want to watch the world burn. And you've got ransom demands in the tens of millions of dollars, not to mention social engineering heists that are more sophisticated than an Ocean's 11 script. So that setup was really enticing. And then on the victim side of the equation, you've got these household names like, Sony and MGM and Caesars and Uber and Microsoft, HubSpot. I mean, you name it, these massive companies that you assume are impenetrable with mountains of money to help them in their tool sets and in their stack for cyber, and somehow they're still getting hit. So I looked at all of this and thought, these aren't technical incidents. These are crime stories with heroes and with villains and with victims and these ticking clocks and massive stakes. But there's a problem, because despite all of the drama, cybersecurity communications is painfully boring. And often the discussions are kind of flat and they're jargony, they're forgettable. People are throwing around tons of acronyms, and unless you're in the know, you're kind of just sitting there looking like, what is that guy talking about? And that means that people all too often are missing the lessons that can be learned. So the CISO signal became my way of merging my past life in storytelling with a mission in cyber. Take the industry's most important lessons and retell them in a way that keeps people glued to their seats, hopefully, not because they should learn, but because they just can't look away. Cyber doesn't need more intelligence. I think it just needs better storytelling.
I think those are some great points there. I think especially on the couple of things. One is that I'll say that I've always thought of cyber as this kind of spy versus spy kind of situation. And I know that when I've talked to my security operations teams, that I've always told them that it is spy versus spy. There is a human on the other side, and we can debate whether on AI and how AI is going to impact cyber in the future. But typically, it is a game of an actor targeting a victim, taking actions, and there's reactions that are happening, and there's systems that are there to prevent these things from occurring, these breaches from occurring. However, the people and the politics and how businesses run and what the priorities of the business are, all of these things kind of play into like, hey, how is it that we can actually defend? I mean, we also have geopolitical problems, which we can't hack back. Typically in most organizations, you can't hack back or do takedowns. So it's kind of very reactive in a way. But the spy versus spy part is that they are, every time a hacker does something to your network, they kind of tell you about their infrastructure. They tell you what they know about your organization. And, there's clues in the noise about what's going on.
Yeah.
And
their fingerprints, sorry to interrupt you. Their fingerprints often tell a story, right? The track that they leave behind them gives a lot of clues as to, what their intentions are and where they're coming from, what their motives are. There's a lot of parallels and similarities there to the true crime space.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other part is the storytelling. I think one of the most important aspects of this is that, we're talking about like how dry cyber speak is, right?
Right.
And I think that happens largely because of how when we do have an incident and there is a breach and we have to respond to it, it becomes a legal action.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And now it becomes a, very fact-driven kind of activity that's being surrounded by legal barriers so that we can maintain privacy and as a corporation, reduce any risk that we might have to the business, right? So there's a lot of things that we want to keep under privilege. And so that becomes a very fact-based kind of activity, not a drama, right? It is drama, but for how we do it, it becomes very fact-based, right? We're trying to reduce our
but
okay.
In communications, and again, the background that I'm coming from is from the PR side oftentimes. And so there were times where not necessarily breaches, but legal situations were happening at publicly traded companies that I worked at. And when you are crafting a press release, oftentimes there is the art of omission in the story, right? It's what
Mhm.
you say and what you don't say. And it is going through, as you pointed out, sometimes dozens of people's hands checking for, well, I don't know if we want to phrase it that way. We have to be careful about the implications there. So you're right that there are facts, but there are at the same time facts that are we're choosing which facts to tell and which facts not to share. And that process of editing is a story unto itself sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we definitely, from my experience, it's like the people were trying to get me to craft narratives on like, hey, how did this happen? And I'm
Right.
like, I'm not a narrative guy. I can give you the facts, because I'm in the middle of this incident and we're having to communicate to, customers or lawyers or something else or regulators or whoever. And, but there are way better people at crafting a story than John Carse or a CISO or someone on the cyber team. We're just not story crafters. That's not what we do. Even though we have a lot of responsibilities for it, it isn't what we do. Right, day to day, that's not what we do.
Right.
But with the rest of the team, you have your marketing, your PR, and your communications people that are there. You have your lawyers who are trying to, uh, you know, reduce risk, right? And then you have the actual facts of the case that are happening as the breach happens. Together as a team, I think we can craft a good story that is good for your, in the US, the SEC filings for like, hey, we have a breach and what's going on? How do we reduce that? But the main thing I wanted to kind of state is that it is, the second part of that is fact. Is what first part is fact based. The second part is actually um, the second part is that one of the like premises around cyber is confidentiality. So we're trying to always reduce the amount of information that we're leaking or exposing or whatever. We have this kind of like innate desire to like shut up about breaches. That's like built into like the cyber character, right?
Right.
Is to close that down. So I think those things, those
It's interesting that you point that out, because if you're looking at heroes and characters from great stories, like Clint Eastwood and so many others, the heroes in those stories, there's almost no dialogue. They almost say nothing, and their character speaks volume just from their silence, right? From this cold, calculated confidence of them just kind of looking into the camera in just the right way, and you know that it's about to go down. They don't have to say anything, but you just know, because certain characters, certain heroes don't need to speak. Their silence speaks volumes.
I love that. I love being characterized as a
I
Clint Eastwood spaghetti
thought you might
western.
like that.
I love it, but I think that being in a spaghetti western is a little bit different. As opposed to being in a conference room, on phone calls, you know, coordinating incident responders and gathering information, trying to figure out what to do. It's stressful, but no one's going to see my mug on the like how this was actually happening and the snide looks that I'm making to people when they're
Right. Right.
but I think it's but I do think that one of the points I wanted to make here is that the storytelling is maybe the most important part. Like, how do we craft the story to the board and executives and the outside stakeholders that might be interested in that story? I think it's important for people to understand that there is a crime being committed, right? That we're the victim, right? We didn't ask to be uh, breached, right, so to speak.
Yep.
And but we kind of have some impediments to building the story externally, and that's where I think a podcast like yours really kind of helps. Is that we can take something that happened, which there are many learnings that are available in those events, and then kind of tease them out in a way that not only that cybersecurity leaders can understand, right, and
Yep.
learn from, but I think it's more important that that people outside of cyber are learning about it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, inside of all of these organizations, you're going to have massive teams of people who know nothing about cybersecurity, could care less about cybersecurity, except they will be the potential attack vector for some sort of social engineering or phishing scam. So you want them to know and understand the risks and educate them in the best way possible and enlist their help as detectives in the story as well. If they're out there looking and aware, then you've got more folks on your team who are going to potentially defend the gates.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point. I mean, I think that it's the story that brings people outside of the community to understand the problems and the risks, so that when they're looking at it again, they can kind of think about how their actions are going to have downstream impacts to the business or themselves, as well. So I think it's a great mission that you're on right now.
Thank you.
So, but walk us through the creative process behind the CISO signal. How do you approach transforming breach analysis, like we were just talking about, this very technically dry and
Yeah.
bunch of information, into something that people actually want to listen to?
So if you want people to listen, if you want people to remember essentially the lesson, to tell the story, the real nut there, the crux of it, the seed, the most important part there is you want to tell the story and not just kind of vomit out a spreadsheet of facts and details. So whenever I hired a new marketing writer on my team, the very first assignment I would always give them was always the same: write a one-page case study. And for anyone who's familiar with a case study, if it's done right, it's really just a tiny version of the hero's journey. Anyone who's familiar with the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell wrote this great book, Hero of a Thousand Faces. George Lucas basically used that as a blueprint for writing the Star Wars trilogy. And you'll see this kind of template repeated again and again, whether it's Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or Harry Potter. This hero's journey happens again and again. So with case studies, typically you start with setting your scene. You got the key players. In your first paragraph, you introduce the protagonist, the customer facing a challenge. You define the obstacle in their path. Maybe it's a dragon or a monster, whatever that happens to be. And then you introduce the helper, the guide, the magic tool that lets them rise to the occasion. But here's where new writers often stumble. They'll try to make us, the vendor, the hero in the story. They bury the reader under a long list of features and jargons as if the product saved the day. And inevitably, I have to step in and say, no, no, no. We're not Luke Skywalker in the story. We're Obi-Wan Kenobi. We're not Frodo. We're Samwise. We're not Harry Potter. We're Ron Weasley. So the customer always has to be the hero. We're just the companion, the guide, the magic that helps them complete their quest. And that's the philosophy, essentially, of how I approach a breach. We cover it really from a human being under pressure kind of way. You've got a tired analyst at 2 a.m., a CISO watching dominoes kind of fall in slow motion, a team that has to make very difficult decisions with imperfect information. That's typically at the heart of most of the stories we tell. So we strip out the jargon and we elevate the human layer, which makes it just so much more relatable, inevitably. And then we structure the stories like a heist. You got your act one, where there's the setup, and act two, where there's a break-in, and act three, where there's the fallout or the blast radius and the repercussions of that. And as the CISO guest co-host, and you were one yourself just a couple of weeks ago, helps me walk through all of the clues, they take on the role of detective. So they're not the villain, they're not the victim, but the hero trying to make sense of all of the chaos. My job is to build the tension, to set the scene, kind of paint a picture, and give the audience that, oh no moment right before everything breaks, because they feel the stakes. And when they feel the stakes, they're going to remember the lesson that accompanies it. And by the end, you don't just understand what happened, you've felt it and you've lived it. And feeling tends to stick far longer than bullet points ever will. So if you can make a security leader kind of lean in to the story, then the learning becomes entertainment, essentially.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think feelings, as much as I try to downplay the role of feelings and emotions in my work. I'm a very technical guy. I like facts. I like making decisions based on facts.
Sure.
It's not very compelling, and I think we see that in in everything that we see happening in the United States political system today. Just the Democrats and the Republicans going at each other's throats and everything else. It's definitely not fact-based kind of communication that's happening. It's the feelings that whatever the narrative is that's driving those those the feelings are what's driving the behavior.
Sure.
It's not.
Let me ask you a question, because
Okay.
I'm really curious about this. And whenever I get an opportunity to interview CISOs, I'm gonna turn the tables for a second and ask you a question. But when you're in the boardroom and you've got the C-suite there, and you have to get them to back something that you think is a priority in terms of budget, giving them the facts versus telling them a story about risk management, how do you handle that? I mean, have you seen a history of, listen, I can rattle off all these facts and they kind of just glaze over? Or is it typically, and obviously I'm leading you with this question, is it typically you finding a way to emote the importance of a decision, that this needs to be a priority now and we need to take care of it? How do you handle that?
Well, in my own cases, right? And I always feel like I've been very successful in building my security programs and growing the number of people that I have, and growing my budgets, and getting, spend, under control, right? And getting what I need. I've really never felt like I had any kind of problems with that. And I think that part of that is because of, how it is that, I particularly build a story, right? I don't have a hero's journey. I have a new tool in my toolkit now. I'll start thinking about it a little bit differently as I approach this. But I do start with some facts, right? Hey, this is what's going on, right? And I usually use, and people that know me know that I always use like situation, complication, resolution as my main way of framing the conversation. What's the situation now? Why is this a problem? And then how do we fix it? Right. And that's typically my story framework. And I think it's important that it's not a technical conversation, because the technology isn't really that compelling. Technology is just not, in the boardroom and with the C-suite. I don't think it's really about it's definitely not a technical conversation, because most of the people that are in the boardroom aren't technical. So
Sure.
you have to kind of turn it into hopefully you can build it into a dollars and cents kind of problem. Because that tends to get more of a reaction of risks that are to the business. So like, is this a real risk or not a real risk? And there's so many not real risks that cybersecurity practitioners talk about, that just wouldn't, even if you did it, it wouldn't drive the needle, wouldn't make you, you wouldn't secure you more. And a lot of times there's a lot of, and my observation is that there's a lot of people talking about, like, from the vendor's perspective, that the vendor all of a sudden became the hero, instead of you, the CISO, being the hero and making sure
Right.
that it's understood that you're the hero, not the vendor. Situation, complication, resolution, and then bringing it back to the complications to the business. Like, what does this mean to the business? Whether it's a regulatory threat in Europe, where if we don't do X or Y or Z, then we're out of compliance with some sort of regulation. Those things tend to be much better received than me talking about the number of vulnerabilities that we have in the network, right?
Right.
it's like if I say, oh, there's so many critical vulnerabilities on the network, that may be true, right? But if everyone was critical, then why aren't we having more incidents, right? And I think that's where I think the board starts to get wary of cyber in particular, is because we talk about all these like facts that don't result. We call it a critical, but it doesn't result in a breach, and it doesn't.
Right.
I mean, and I think that we start to lose credibility. So again, it's like, what are those things that are actually going to be risks to the business, and then how do we, what's the plan for resolving the tension? It's like, what is it that we're going to do, and how do we measure our success against real business outcomes? And again, that's kind of the approach that I take on it. But we definitely could debate whether I've been successful or not, or with people that I've worked with.
I have no doubt that you were incredibly successful at it.
But did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think you got to it.
Okay. Very good. Well, let's so we learned a little bit about the process and the hero's journey, and the importance of storytelling and making it emotional, right? We want our stakeholders, whether it's an audience or the board or other executives that you're dealing with, to have an emotional response. It's something that they'll remember and they'll take forward with them, so that we can move my security program forward, right?
Yep.
Increase the security posture of the network, so that I can not be MGM or AT&T or these other big breaches that have occurred. And I do think the story is really important, right? Analyzing those stories is important. Learning the lessons from those stories is incredibly important. And the more people that are listening to it, the better off I think the organization is.
Yep.
But let me ask you, after analyzing dozens of infamous breaches, are there common patterns in how security decisions go wrong that most CISOs and security leaders don't see coming?
Yeah, I would say at this point, it looks like, at least to me, as essentially a civilian, that most breaches don't start with brute force attacks or hacks. They start with some blind spot, and social engineering more often than not is at the root cause. It's the easiest way in, I think. Across the breaches that we've covered on the show, there are definitely some patterns that appear again and again. And the big one is social engineering. It's, I think, still the number one attack vector. You mentioned MGM and Caesars. They were both compromised because attackers essentially targeted the help desk. It was not a firewall. It was not the SIM. The help desk, one well-crafted phone call and a great story during that phone call can con people and unravel $1 billion in security spend, right? The second pattern, I think, would be assumptions, right? Teams assume that third-party vendors are secure. They assume MFA is everywhere and it's working. They assume that their backups are always clean. And attackers love assumptions. They treat them like unlocked windows. And a third pattern, I think we'd call that the almost secure trap. Companies are 80% secure. It's that 80-20 Pareto principle, but it's that last 20% that saves you, the alert that didn't get escalated, the system that wasn't fully patched, the third-party contract that didn't include visibility. That small, seemingly harmless gap becomes the blast radius. And finally, I'd say breaches often reveal misaligned priorities, right? Businesses optimize for speed, for productivity, but security optimizes for resilience. Somewhere between those two poles, a tiny decision often gets made that nobody remembers until the attackers end up exploiting it. So the lesson isn't that attackers are always brilliant. It's that organizations are always human and fallible.
So the common patterns that you discussed, I've definitely seen this. And I think it's also true that hackers aren't one and done. It's not one attack that happens. Um, Going back to the spy versus spy kind of analogy that I was telling, that we were talking about earlier, that is that, typically the attacks have two parts to it. One is the attack, right? And so, but you have attack evolution and you have attack progression, right? And so attack evolution is that I'm trying to get on this network. So I send an email to Jeremy. Jeremy doesn't bite. So I send an email to another person. I start crafting the email differently, so that Jeremy will want to click this link, or Jeremy will want to log into this website to find information. And I'm just sending attacks and attacks and attacks. I might send attacks to hundreds of people in the finance department, or I might send an attack to, the entire company. But it doesn't happen. It's not like I send a phishing email and it gets clicked and I target the exact right person. There are so many indicators that an attack is happening. And once I have the evolution of this very many emails to different people coming from different, maybe I'll send one from the CEO or make it look like it's coming from the CEO or whatever, however I'm going to attack that, again, happens in tens, hundreds, thousands of times. And then I get some progress. And that's what I'm talking about, attack progress. So evolution would be changing my emails, right? Changing
Yep.
whether it's a download file to a website, click a link or something like that. So those are evolution, but I'm trying to get access to the network. So my next step would be to get you to give me your credentials or download something where I could breach your system. And I'm progressing my attack. But once I get to the point where I have you clicking a link, that's great. But maybe the defenses are working and that link didn't work. But I got you to click a link. Now I know the story that needs you to click the link. So now I go send you something else, or send someone else in your organization something that's similar that has a slightly different link or slightly different payload. And then I evolve that attack there. Right. So I'm evolution at that stage. And then I go to the next stage. And then I go to the next stage. And every single time I progress, there's these evolutions or these failed tests. As an attacker, it's like the scientific methods being employed to kind of move my attack forward.
Yeah.
And all those little breadcrumbs are all over the place. But one of the issues that we see is that there's so many alerts and there's so many problems with detecting an attack on the network, or you have people that had a bad day. So maybe they don't, respond to the attack or, in the way that they should. And but there's all sorts of different things that are going on that I think there are lots and lots of opportunities to see that, your defenses, whether they're technical controls, right, where we're talking about, phishing detection or EDR tools on your system or whatever it is, that those could be working or not working. But you also have, like we were talking about, third parties and assuming that they're secure as well, because we sent them a bunch of questions and they answer the questions and we said, okay, great. Check, you answer the questions. You said you're secure. Awesome. But whatever those problems are, then I would say that was technical controls versus administrative controls, like things that, I can't put my own technology in someone else's network. So I have administrative controls. And I'm hoping that they're going to answer the questionnaire truthfully. And then I can make a risk decision on whether or not I take on that vendor or don't take on that vendor. There's so many opportunities for that to go wrong as well. Right.
Yep.
And I think that these patterns are, still very common today. I think that we're talking about stuff that I've seen go back, the entire length of my career, almost 30 years now, of these same kind of attacks evolving over time, becoming more sophisticated, coming at us in increasing speeds, right? And velocity of the attacks have been increasing as well.
Yep.
Our attack surface has also grown a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that those, but I think it comes back to these same patterns that you were just discussing, that these are the patterns that keep CISOs up at night, and keep businesses at risk, right? It's just these cracks in the armor that allow, breaches to turn into $1 million ransoms or tens of $1 million of ransom.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's some interesting similarities in cyber attacks and sales and marketing. And you mentioned, this evolution of the ask, where they'll see what works, and then based on that, they'll take that and they'll build on it and move it forward with other people potentially in the company. That's essentially A/B testing in marketing.
Yes.
Or how you would craft a sales outreach email or call. See, try it until it works. And once you figure out what works, you take that and you build on it to make it more potent, more dangerous in the terms of cyber attacks, or more profitable in the terms of marketing and sales. The psychology that is there plays on humans and emotions and our weaknesses. It's a numbers game, so there's facts there, and you can kind of use those facts to build a better weapon. But it's also at its core, the weapon is based on feelings. So it's this marriage of facts and feelings that makes the most potent, deadly weapon for cybersecurity.
That is so. I hadn't heard someone equate marketing with cyber in that way.
It makes marketing folks look even worse than our reputation, but it's a fact.
Yeah, but it's been at least but there was a gentleman I worked with that he actually brought this. He was on the cyber side, right? And he had moved from cyber to marketing on the marketing side. And he said something very similar. It's like, this is just cyber applied to, sales, right? It's like, I have threat intelligence. I have all this information about people, what they click, all this kind of stuff. And then I just take that same information, and that it could have been attack telemetry about what was working, what was not working. And I send marketing emails, John. And
that is a go-to-market plan, right? You're creating this profile, this persona of who the ideal customer is, or in the case of cyber, ideal victim is. And you're saying, what do they care about? What are they interested? What are they looking for? What are the problems they need to solve? What's going to get them to move to what you want them to do? It's exactly the same. Maybe not exactly, but there are a lot
very
of
similar. I mean, just like we're, in both cases, I think we're, hackers are trying to, monetize your lack of security in your company. They're trying to monetize it in their own ways, whereas marketers are kind of doing the same thing. I think it's interesting. I mean, like I said, it's really interesting from the point of view of, again, invoking feelings, making it. This also is something that I think that the C-suite can understand. They do take a lot of information about marketing and communications and how that translates into sales. I think this might be another bridge that cyber practitioners can use to make their messages more heard, right? To understand that the same effect that we do when we're on the marketing side, selling into our customer base, finding that customer and getting them to, take the credit card out and buy whatever it is that we're selling, is the same activity that's happening on the hacker side, trying to get our employees to take actions that might be detrimental to the organization as well. And it is a psychological, it is cycle. I won't say warfare, but that's what I was thinking is psychological warfare.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just that in just the, the impact is different, right? Meaning that, most companies are trying to help their customers, solve a problem, that their products solve, right? So you have a problem, we have a solution. It's a little bit different on the hacker side. They're not really trying to solve problems; they're just trying to exploit, um, how good your company is at marketing and stuff by stealing the customer information and attacking your
Yeah.
customers, in turn. So I think it's a good potential, um, communication path for creating common understanding between the cyber team and the executive team.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If it, I think it would be helpful, maybe once a year, a couple times a year, getting together with the sales and marketing folks, because they have their finger on the pulse of sort of the psychology that is needed to understand the enemy sometimes in a way that maybe cybersecurity folks don't have. Um, there's a different way to profile there that they are very familiar with, and it's
Mhm.
worth kind of communicating and trading some ideas and saying, how would you look at this? How would you approach protecting this, or speaking to all of the employees in house about how to deal with phishing attacks, how to prevent clicking on something that maybe shouldn't be clicked on. There's a resource in house often that is underutilized.
Agreed. Um, Kind of continuing on
Go for it.
lessons from breaches, right? As in your research, have you noticed a particular decision-making process that changed how you think about cybersecurity leadership?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question, and I would say that bad cybersecurity isn't usually a tech problem; it's a decision problem. What struck me most while studying all of these incidents is how rarely the fatal flaw is purely technical. It's usually a leadership moment, a trade off, or a shortcut, or a
Mhm.
pressure point. You got MGM, who fell because of a 10-minute phone call. SolarWinds spiraled because the org wasn't structured to recognize early warning signs. Acelion was breached because a system in end of life limbo kind of stayed mission critical for a decade. And the CISOs I interview, they're not just technologists, they're narrators of risk, essentially, right? They
Mhm.
walk around the company telling these stories meant to influence budget, like we talked about, change behavior, potentially reshape priorities, or get buy-in before it's too late. So once you look at cybersecurity through that lens, you see that leadership matters far more than technology. The tools are, just instruments essentially. It's the decisions behind them that shape the story. So oftentimes the biggest influence, the most powerful weapon a CISO has is the story they tell in the boardroom. And that's why I asked you about that earlier.
Right. And digging a little bit more into security communications, um, how do you think security leaders can practice that when building security culture? I mean, we talked a little bit about
Yeah.
the marketing team and using your resources that are inside the company a little bit. Um, we talked a bit about why the story is important, but how do you think security leaders can practice that when building their culture?
Yeah, I think there's some opportunities there. I think some things are changing. I think that if you want better security behavior, you're going to have to give employees a story where they are the hero, right? So most security training threats treat employees like essentially potential liabilities, right? You click the wrong link and suddenly you're the punchline of a terrible, very expensive joke. You fall for a fish and you are the problem. But if you want a real culture shift. You kind of flip that narrative and you enlist them as detectives, not victims. Give them the thrill of spotting the perp or catching the crook. Reward them the same way that we reward researchers in bug bounty programs. Make catching a phishing email something people will brag about instead of fearing. And here's the part security teams I think often overlook. Storytelling isn't just a nice to have kind of thing. It's a skill set. And most CISOs aren't trained as communicators. Most engineers don't think in a narrative framework. It's not a flaw. It's just not really a priority for their job. So that means there's a whole new potential role emerging inside modern security teams. Someone who understands communication at a very human level. Someone from maybe marketing and comms or behavioral psychology who can translate risk into relatable stories, who can connect with the non-technical employees, the folks sitting at the front desk or the folks in product or the folks, in marketing and sales, and help them sharpen the CISO's message before it ever reaches the board. Because the truth is, the security team already knows the risks, right? But if the rest of the organization doesn't understand them, nothing is really going to change. That potential new role for a communicator can become the bridge that you mentioned, sort of the coach, the person who ensures that security isn't just said, right? It's just not talked about it, but it's felt and it's remembered and it's acted on. So when employees can see themselves in the narrative, they start behaving like the protagonist, and heroes always make better security decisions than some obligated employee ever will.
I love this track. I think that I think that it's I've often seen the problem where usually the way that I'm thinking about this is that I feel like I'm always building slides, right? I'm always trying to craft a story, right? And it's like getting the data, getting everything together so I can build this story. And people that I've worked with in the past, they know that I have these slide decks that are hundreds of slides long. Hold on. It's not.
That sounds like a party, John.
It's a material. And then as I have problems, I create a slide about it, and I just start building this slide deck of a material. And then whenever I have a meeting, or I have a new stakeholder that I'm trying to convince of something, I go to my slide deck and I pull the slides together for the story that I'm trying to tell. But that takes an incredible amount of time, and
Sure.
I never know if I'm getting the story right. Do I understand that stakeholder well enough, right? To what are his emotional or her emotional buttons, and then what's important to them. And it's like in the process of the technical craft of pulling together slides, I kind of miss the human element. But having someone on my team that is always thinking about the human element, I think would make me a more powerful
Absolutely.
more powerful executive, just because it's that storytelling that I think we miss all the time, right? Yeah. It's great that you have facts and there's risks and it could be a problem, but a lot of times, again, the downstream impact it's like people smoking. They know it's going to kill them, right? But they keep smoking because it didn't kill them just right now, but it's eventually going to kill them, right? It cut off 10 years of their life, and that's okay. They smoked every single day.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times cybersecurity is like that in the company as well. It's almost like, we do things, we cut corners, we do these little, we take actions that we shouldn't take. And maybe sometimes the technology prevents an attack from occurring or being successful, but sometimes it won't. But I think that having a communicator on the team, like someone that's like their job is to think about how do we communicate our security program to the masses, right?
Yep.
And then two, what you were just saying about the gosh, what were you just saying? You were just saying about the role of communicator and something else.
Yeah, basically the idea is if you have somebody on the team who can function as that bridge, right? They can speak to the organization at whole in terms that connect with people who aren't technical, and the facts will just kind of wash over them. And they can prep the CISO before they go in to speak to the board to help them really hone the message so that it lands with the people who, again, you constantly barrage them with critical threats. We've got to do something. How do you know and identify the buttons to push with this person on the board or this person in the C-suite to get their buy-in in a way that works? I kind of think about it I'm a Star Trek fan. All that kind of stuff I love, and I think about the original series, and I think about Kirk, and I think about Spock. Just stick one of them on the bridge of the Enterprise, and that ship crashes into a planet or gets killed by aliens in a couple weeks. But the two of them working together, the logic and the facts and the emotion and the communication and the motivation of the crew, you put that pair together, and they are unstoppable. In my humble opinion, the best crew of any ship in Starfleet.
Right. And I think that I love that analogy as well. But I think it goes back to making the employee the hero, giving them some incentive to be that hero, be the hero character, not just the cog in the wheel. You're not that red shirt that you've never seen before, but he's the one that went to the planet and he's the one that's going to be killed.
He's going to buy
it every time, right? Every time they go somewhere. So, but it is exactly that. It's like, don't make that person that red shirt that's going on this mission and he's the one that's going to be sacrificed. How do you make him the hero of the story so that they are motivated to own those security tenants, whatever those security tenants might be that you're trying to profess? But you need someone to communicate that, hey, this is what it is. This is how you become the hero, and then this is how you get rewarded for being part of that story. I think that's a really important message there.
Yep.
Thanks, Jeremy. So just being selfish about browser security and SquareX, how would you communicate an abstract concept like the browser is the new endpoint and must be defended, right, to a non-technical audience?
It's a tough one. It's always difficult to sort of distill a threat like that into some sort of analogy that makes sense to the average folks. But I would kind of look at it this way. Your browser used to just kind of be a harmless window on your computer. But I tend to think of it now in terms of an old classic vampire horror film where it becomes the threshold to your home, right? To your sacred space. So if you picture this, an employee goes home, opens their laptop on the sofa, and suddenly that fortress of an office device becomes a relaxed personal machine, and the browser, the thing sitting between Netflix, online shopping, your dinner delivery, becomes the doorway into the company. And here's the part most people often forget. In folklore, as I said, a vampire can't enter unless you invite it in. And in cybersecurity, the browser is that invitation. One click, one allow, one moment of lowered guard after a long day of work, and an attacker is inside the same tab where Salesforce lives, or your HR data, or your customer records. So when I explain that the browser is the new endpoint, it keeps things relatively simple. So if you imagine employees carrying a second laptop that you can't patch, you can't monitor, and you can't protect it, but it's the one thing they use to access everything that's important. You'd never tolerate that in a million years, yet that's exactly what happens when we treat the browser like a harmless app instead of the new operating system of work. Attackers don't storm the castle anymore. They slip through the doorway that we forget to guard. So if the browser is the threshold, modern security has to guard that door.
Absolutely. I love that. I love the analogy, especially, I mean, I don't know if you remember that movie Salem's Lot, but it's
Stephen King, yeah.
Stephen King movie. And it was exactly that folklore of, you have to invite the vampire in if it's going to take advantage. Then all hell breaks loose, right? And I think it's the truth with the browsers as well today. It used to be that we had these, castles and moats that we surrounded ourselves with in our own data centers and, our own rooms inside the hard exterior of the workplace that we worked. But today we just run around with just the browser and let people in, let vampires in anytime they want. Thanks for the analogy. I think it's great. I'm trying to figure out how we work that into our marketing messages.
I'll look for that. I'm curious to see how you guys do that.
Okay. So as AI becomes more prevalent in enterprise environments, are we seeing new types of security stories emerge? What are the breach narratives that worry you most going forward?
Wow. Yeah. AI is terrifying and exciting all at the same time. The potential there, I kind of think about it like fire in the early days of human history, right? Fire is there to light the way, to keep you warm, to cook the food that you use to feed your family. But at the same time, that fire can burn down your house and kill everybody inside in the most gruesome imaginable way. So AI isn't really creating new attackers necessarily. It's kind of multiplying the old ones. So what keeps me up at night is this simple, frightening truth that AI doesn't just invent new attack methods. It kind of super turbocharges the oldest and most dangerous ones we have. So social engineering, which I mentioned, we've already seen what it looks like in the wild with the influence of AI. And you take the story of Arup. We did an episode on it a few weeks back. There's this legendary engineering firm behind some of the world's most iconic buildings. You got the Sydney Opera House, the Beijing National Stadium, HSBC HQ in Hong Kong, even elements of Apple Park. These are people who solve physics at the scale of skyscrapers. And yet in early, I think it was 2024, they were totally blindsided by nothing more than the illusion of pixels and trust. So in their Hong Kong office, an employee received what looked like a legitimate request for a confidential funds transfer. And he was skeptical at first. He was good. He was a good employee. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. Something seems off here. So the scammers escalated. And they invited him into what looked like a routine executive video conference call. And on screen were the CFO and several colleagues, all looking and sounding exactly like you would expect them to sound and look, except, of course, none of them were real.
Wow.
Every face, every voice, every little gesture were AI-generated deepfakes, a full virtual meeting designed to manipulate one employee into authorizing, I believe it was like $25 million. And that attack wasn't about malware. It wasn't about firewalls. It was about identity theft at a cinematic scale. Attackers stealing people, right? Not passwords. And this is the part that should worry every organization. You no longer need to be a nation state to pull this off. You just need a few seconds of publicly available video, a keynote, a Zoom webinar, a LinkedIn clip, and modern AI can clone a person's presence, their tone, the authority with chilling accuracy. So from there, attackers can impersonate executives. They can fake board meetings, simulate emergency requests, and even coordinate entire teams of colleagues who just don't exist. So the problem there is that traditional controls can't keep up because they're built on a very old assumption that if I can see you and I can hear you, then of course I can trust you. AI breaks that foundation completely, and the next era of breaches won't start with malware. They will start with a flawless, undetectable mimicry and a single employee trying just to do the right thing. So the next wave of breaches won't start with code. I'm pretty sure they're going to start with these perfect imitations.
I think it's interesting that it's just an escalation of that. We have like people that fake WhatsApp messages from CEOs to other people and trying to exert pressure. It's the same social engineering attacks that we've been seeing, just amped up to actually be, using deep fakes for that same kind of pressure building that, we're human. Invariably, we're going to try to do what our executives and leaders want us to do, and that using that power in that way, I think is, I think it will be more chilling. And then, after having so many CISOs star on your podcast, what was the biggest concern that worries those CISOs?
So that's an interesting question as well, because everyone is different. Everyone has their own set of experience, but there's definitely, I'd say, a through line and a commonality there where CISOs typically aren't afraid of the threats you might think that they're afraid of. They're afraid of not being heard. And I'll explain. After interviewing, I guess it's at this point, we're talking about a couple dozen CISOs, and I look forward to a long career where I interview hundreds more. But I would say that the most consistent fear isn't going to be the ransomware or the mustache twirling nation state villains or even a super intelligent AI like we're talking about. The thing that keeps them up at night is something far more human. It's knowing the risk and not being able to convince the organization to act in time, right? So CISOs live at this strange kind of intersection of enormous responsibility with limited authority. And it's a stressful place to stand, especially when you know that everything is going to burn at some point and the blame will find them first. And even if the root cause traces back to decisions they couldn't influence, they worry about their teams burning out. They worry about third-party vendors they can't fully see into. They worry about regulations that are moving faster than budgets. And they worry about being held accountable for decisions they didn't actually make. So if you listen closely, all of those worries come back to one thing, and that's communication. Every CISO, no matter how technical, ends up becoming a translator, right? They take the chaos of the threat landscape and turn it into something a board or executive team can understand, can prioritize, and can get behind with funding. And when that translation fails, when they can't tell the story clearly enough to win over the internal audience, everything collapses. And CISOs don't just defend the infrastructure, they curate organizational clarity. And that is not an easy job.
I agree. I mean, I think I've definitely been in that board meeting where something went the wrong direction, and talking to the CEO and telling them, that, hey, yeah, this risk actually did occur, that we did have this attack, it was successful, and it did cause us a problem, and trying to say I told you so without saying I told you so, right? It's super hard, right? And then the second part is like, even though I had been communicating it in the monthly meetings that we had with the executives, even though I put it into my weekly report every week that, hey, this is a problem, even though I've had personal conversations with this person and telling them, hey, this is a problem, we should do something about it. When it actually transpired, they told me that, hey, you weren't vocal enough. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know how, I mean, what do you want me to do? Just like, I mean, I've already lost all my hair. I can't pull more of it out, so but again, but we're caught in that kind of that area where even if you communicate, you understand the risk, and you're communicating the risk, the business is going to do what the business is going to do, and I don't really have the authority to stop these actions from occurring, which invariably puts me with a crosshair on my back, right? But also, without the authority, it can be a very stressful time for people especially when these occur.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jeremy, I super enjoyed having you on our podcast. Thanks for joining me on it.
It was my pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.